and good afternoon, everyone. We want to thank you for attending today's NLPA webinar. Today, we will take a look at future procurement leaders. All attendees will be in listen-only mode for the duration of this presentation. If you have any questions, please ask in the question box, and I will post them to the presenter during the webinar as time allows. Now, I'm pleased to introduce to you today's presenters, Mr. Ron Crabtree and Mr. David Millington. David Millington is the Director of Education for Next Level Purchasing Association. He is a certified strategic planning professional, and he brings over 18 years experience in the strategy execution, product and service development, organizational and supply chain excellence arenas. He is a certified supply chain professional, certified new product development professional, a CSPP, and a certified Lean Six Sigma Black Belt. He holds a master's degree in quality systems management at the National Graduate School of Quality Management. He brings hands-on experience at the VP, director, and manager levels, guiding and facilitating the development of strategic and tactical solutions to intricate organizational, product, and service challenges. Ron Crabtree is the CEO of Meta Ops Inc. and Meta Experts. He has over 30 years experience in organizational and business innovation and transformation, and along the way, more than 20 years in procurement and supply chain. He is an internationally recognized expert in cutting-edge business process improvement methodologies. Ron is a Master Lean Six Sigma Black Belt, having helped train and certify thousands of Lean Six Sigma and Six Sigma belts in driving hundreds of millions in value for clients. He is the co-author of 5 books on operational excellence. He has served as instructor for Villanova University and the University of San Francisco as a lead subject matter expert in Lean Six Sigma Green and Black Belt, Masters of Business Analysis, Supply Chain Management, and Lean Supply Chain. Ron has past and current certifications and expertise in numerous industry-recognized trainings and is a developer of the Top Facilitator Program for Leaders of Organizational Transformation. David, Ron, thanks for joining us today as we all look forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much, Amber. So today, we're going to focus on the required skills, the critical skills that the modern procurement function leader needs that are critical, essential. And we would focus on 3 different areas where we'll understand the importance of models, operational models, such as a SCOR framework, and how that plays into effective supply chain leadership. We'll also focus on supply chain maturity models and how that enables one to lead high-impact procurement operations. And thirdly, we will focus on the correlation of supply chain operational excellence and the NLPA body of knowledge, as we have positioned this body of knowledge to enable procurement function leaders to be able to operate effectively and efficiently in the modern landscape. So off the bat, I'd like to go into some polling questions. We have 3. We're going to have this first one. We're going to have one in the middle of the course, and then we'll have one at the end of the webinar. So kindly, please, if you would rate yourself, and how do you perceive, how you see your level of expertise as it relates to the modern procurement function leadership?
So Amber, as a heads up here, we got a polling question that doesn't agree with the slide. So just pick the number that corresponds to what you see on the slide.
It should be polling question number 1.
Correct. Yeah, it's just we inadvertently got a different polling question showing on the screen. So just pick between a 1 and 5 value as you see on the screen, and we'll be fine.
Sorry, gentlemen, I'm not sure what happened with the order. I'll look into that.
Sure,
Fair enough.
Yeah, this is a different question.
Yep, but we could probably surmise from this that the audience is spread across the continuum with respect to expertise, from as much as a third of the audience feeling like they're at the beginning of their learning journey, and as much as 20% feeling like I'm pretty high level here. So I think David will have to roll with that.
Sure. Okay, so I'm going to close this out. Okay, so we're going to focus now on the overall goals of procurement leadership. Ideally, we are responsible for ensuring that we effectively manage spend and we support operations, the overall operations that align with the organizational objectives, and we're effectively managing the source to pay process, that we're engaging our key stakeholders, including our customers, effectively, and that we're developing and implementing sourcing strategies, we're effectively managing risk, and very importantly, that we're developing and managing procurement talent. So this slide here, we see that the key procurement leader skill dimensions, they're underpinned by three critical skill areas: interpersonal skills, problem solving skills, and procurement and technical skills. On the procurement and technical skills side, it's essentially mastery of all of the key elements that go into effective procurement. And effective problem solving skills, in which we're able to manage and handle the day-to-day problems, long-term, the short-term problems and the long-term problems that impact our supply chains. And of course, effectively managing the human side of the procurement function, so the interpersonal skills. So in this pyramid here, we see that the day-to-day operational acumen, this domain focuses on the day-to-day activities, the generation of purchase orders, the negotiation that goes into ensuring that we are effectively procuring and positioning and the necessary inputs that we need for organizations to run. And then we have the technical acumen that's required, pretty much your short-range planning, of quarterly or potentially within the 1 year spectrum. And then we have the strategic procurement acumen, which looks at the big picture, and where procurement leaders with what we call sitting at the executive table, in which corporate strategies are formulated. And you would find that as we move higher up the leadership ladder, that interpersonal skills are very, very, very important. Pardon me? So the procurement leaders of the future must be able to handle the elements on this slide. And I think I'll pass this on to Ron, and he could elaborate on this.
Okay, well, thank you, David. And, you know, we can read the slide here, but I'd like to emphasize a few of these bullets, starting with the first one, you know, looking beyond the focus on just price, which is traditionally what we're tasked with as procurement professionals. But the reality is, depending on your industry, the biggest opportunity to make a dent in cost and help improve profitability may have nothing to do with price. And that's where the concept of value engineering really comes into play. I'll be talking more about that later in the webinar as well. If we drop down to the bullet where it says provide product and process leadership, you know, the more dependent your organization is on buying parts and services, outside services, the more you're dependent on suppliers and vendors to provide that into your supply chain, the more important this particular element is. Because if you think about product life cycles, if they're turning very, very quickly, we're highly dependent on our suppliers to be part of the supply of that. Having them engaged really closely with us in developing process and product together can be very powerful. Think about technologies. We're not going to get into it today, but Industry 4.0, if you haven't heard that one, you will be. And it describes, like 8 different defined aspects of technology that are causing huge changes in how businesses deliver value to their customers. Things like blockchain, Internet of Things, additive manufacturing, and what are called edge sensors. The ability now with the cloud to know way out in the field where we're pumping oil and mining, or all the way out at the end at the point of purchase, what's going on live in the supply chain, and using that to communicate and drive behavior in our supply functions. And then finally, metrics. And at the end of the day, you get what you measure. So you got to be really careful what you pick. Luckily for procurement professionals, we don't have to invent any of this. Many of those things are defined in the Porter model. The Supply Chain Operations Reference Guide has more than 130 different defined best practice metrics, many of which directly relate to procurement and supply. Back to you, David.
Sure. And I believe I have this slide. So one of the things that at NLPA that we were able to do was to formulate a model, our supply executive leadership model, which has 38 sub-competencies and 7 areas of competency. This model is underpinned by 3 elements: customer requirements, a thorough understanding of the market, and business requirements. And these are the underpinnings for effective leadership and effective execution of the procurement function, really having a solid understanding of those dimensions. And so this is underpinned, again, by 7 areas of competency in which procurement leaders, it's essential that we understand the business landscape in which we are operating, and that we are very much engaged and involved in strategic product design. Because many times procurement is an afterthought when it comes to having critical input in how products and services are designed and developed. And in terms of also selecting the appropriate metrics to measure how effectively we are achieving our procurement function mandates. So again, this is the supply executive leadership model, which is part of our the underpinning of our executive leadership course, which is going to be released soon. Pardon me. So the first area of competency is the ability to assist, improve, or lead the corporate strategic planning process. And again, this is a area where many in the procurement space are not engaged or heavily involved. Much of the work that's executed on our side falls in the, as we mentioned before, the tactical or the operational day-to-day level, but those key strategic decisions and initiatives and the formulation of those, in many cases, in many organizations, procurement is not involved or heavily engaged. And this area has 6 competencies, which involves environmental scanning, in which we would, as procurement leaders, scan and understand the environments that our businesses are operating in. So this way we can make the effective decisions as far as engaging our supplier base, and developing and managing that dimension in order to bring in and ensure a cost-effective acquisition of raw material inputs.
So David, with your permission, I could expand a little bit on one of those we just talked about, which was SWOT, right? Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So if we were to move to the next slide, this is where, we pull in some of the best practices I mentioned earlier, Porter's model, the supply chain operations reference model. We take the external scans to understand from an enterprise risk perspective. We have to continually scan what's going on. What's changing out there that we need to be getting in front of in our supply chain, in our sourcing and development of the future supply. And then, of course, the environmental scan that's internal is, at the end of the day, we've got to serve our organization extremely well. So what are the unmet needs that the organization we work in has with respect to supply, and what can we do to make that better or different? So if we go to the SWOT model on this slide, slide 12, I just want to zero in on a couple of areas for a moment. If we look at the blue colored Starbucks coffee SWOT analysis, internal factors, and if you look at the negative aspects, some things to think about here is how do we get at all of the components of the internal external scan and pull these things in to really understand our risk from a price point perspective, the standards for the products. And then I like this imitability word, hadn't heard that one recently, right? So you can imitate, or can it be imitated? And there's risk of that. So how can our supply side participate in making sure we continue to differentiate and be special in the eyes of the customer? If we go to the upper right hand, the green matrix around internal and external factors, take a look at the negatives things here. This is item 3, high level of out of stock mission critical inputs. That's enterprise risk staring us in the face. We're not able to perform as an organization. We begin to lose relevancy very quickly. And then how about biodegradable materials and sustainability of the supply chain? We are really tasked with that as supply professionals to begin getting way out in front on that and thinking about the fact that we're going to be required by mandates eventually by the governments to come up with zero landfill situations, coming up with total ownership of the product or service for its entire life cycle, including the end of its use and bringing it back in and repurposing or otherwise finding a earth-friendly way to dispose of it. So lots of challenges. You can read this chart on your own, but lots of things to think about when it comes to a simple SWOT analysis. Maybe not so simple. Moving on to the next slide here.
To add to that, Ron, the SWOT analysis could be done on the organizational or the corporate level, and it could also be done as this matrix here is, it could be done on the procurement function itself, where as procurement leaders, we look at our procurement departments and we run that SWOT analysis.
Very good.
So it can be done at the departmental level.
Very good. So here we get into the next set of competencies around improving and leading product strategy. And this first bullet is really around understanding the total cost to serve. I'm going to expand on that here in a little bit. And really understanding our internal customers and what it takes to satisfy them as a sourcing function to help them be fully effective. And then the second bullet, absolutely critical, because if what we're sourcing directly impacts our customers, for example, outsourced contact center and stuff like that, or if it's going to somehow directly impact the customer experience with our products or services, we have a huge ownership of making sure we get that part right. So I'll expand on the next slide on this last, toward the end here, where we talk about value engineering. So let's take a deeper dive into that. So what we can see here in this slide would be basically think about lean manufacturing and the practice of lean best practices. And in a classic, Kaizen or lean activity, we would look at all the steps of a process. So in the upper right-hand corner, we've got the first half of a 2-page chart. And you'll notice here's all the different steps in a hypothetical process, making soup in a kitchen, if you will. And then we've done an analysis here. What are the steps that actually add value? How do we know that? It's what the customer wants to pay for. That's where intimacy with the customer is so important. And what are the things that are either non-value add or required, but not really adding value? And then really understanding how that breaks down across cost of transportation, motion, overproduction, overprocessing. If you go to the second page below, we have weighting, 5 of the classic 8, 9 classic wastes that we talk about. And then we can break that down and really get an understanding of what's our true opportunity and what can we do to design the process to deliver better results cheaper. And I'll just tell a couple of really quick stories about real world. When I was working in the automotive industry and running procurement for automotive interiors, think about the inside roof of the automobile, the headliner, textile covered, foam back textiles going onto a strata. And in the auto industry, we've been pounding on price forever. In fact, there's year-over-year price decreases woven right into the master agreements with suppliers. So we really beat on price very skillfully. But I was tasked. I had to find another 5% per year with, in my cost, right? So how do I do that? And we took a really hard look at getting tight with our suppliers. We took a look at that woven textile, and it's got foam on the back of it. And we worked with the supplier, and we said, what can we do to get cost out of it? Not price, but cost. And they came and looked at how we were processing the material and said, well, wait a minute, you're trimming all this foam off on the outside of the headliner. Maybe we could make that fabric and only put foam down the middle where it actually needed for the headliner. Voila, they were able to adjust their process, cut almost 8% of the total cost of the product that we were buying in terms of the actual cost of it, because we weren't throwing away so much foam because we didn't need it anyway. It would get trimmed out of the headliner. Another story, which this gets closer to the value engineering side, is involve your suppliers in what you're doing to look for opportunities. For example, we had started up a new headliner line with a new technology. It involved a two-part resin activation system, and we had a problem. The resins would migrate from the headliner as it's being processed onto the tooling surfaces, and it would build up over time, cause massive headaches, and having to grind it off and try to clean it and put mold spray on there. It was driving huge scrap issues. We were probably throwing away $1 million worth of material alone on an annual basis. And I kept going back into my suppliers, having to come in and looking at what we were doing, and voila, we had a supplier that showed up with an entirely different type of non-woven. So we were using a knitted textile for the back of the headliner. They came up with a product that was actually produced with a paper making process, and we were able to use that to substitute in place of the woven. It eliminated the migration of the glue to the tool surface. It cut our scrap by 90%. Here's the best part. It was cheaper than the woven material. So altogether, that was driving several $1 million a year right straight through to the bottom line for that one plant with just one engineering intervention. Value engineering is a big deal to procurement professionals. Next slide. In this third area here, this is around designing the procurement function to realize and support the corporate strategy. And lots of good points here. If we get to under customer requirements, analyzing the points of friction. What do we mean by that? Well, inside organizations, we do tend to have internal and external requirements. And guess what? They can be competitive. They can actually be counterintuitive. The classic story is I'm giving purchasing all kinds of pressure to get the price out. I'm giving manufacturing all kinds of grief because they're not performing. But the root cause is I drove down the cost, which reduced the quality of the material, which makes manufacturing struggle. I'm actually throwing away money now because I'm wasting so many resources dealing with material that doesn't quite work in the guise of saving cost on the purchasing. Very, very important that we truly, truly understand the total cost of ownership. At the very last bullet here, designing a risk mitigation strategy. There's some pieces to that aren't necessarily apparent. Working through a go, no-go against corporate priorities. Maybe going through a fishbone Ishikawa diagram to isolate what are the causation factors to go after. Then we can work through what's called failure mode and effect analysis, which we don't have time to define today, but very important to drill down to exactly what is the risk priority numbers and which things get priority, and moving into project prioritization matrix. But on the next slide, let's take a little deeper look and talk about total cost to serve. And this is an area where sourcing procurement professionals can really make a mark on the organization to help us really understand what it truly costs, not just the price, but the total opportunities to improve how we're performing. So, if you take a look at the chart here, we're comparing supply chain A with supply chain B. And you work your way down through these various, by the way, this is tying back to the SCOR framework: plan, source, make, deliver, return, enable, different defined processes that we would work in. But where does the data come from? That is often a problem. Most organizations don't track and measure this data in a meaningful way that we can grab and use to understand total cost of ownership and getting at that total cost of serve across the supply chain that we're supporting. I teach a very advanced form of value stream mapping we can weave that into some custom training for customers along with the NLPA body of knowledge. And how do you actually capture the true activity costs for the people, computers, what's the total capability of quality, first-time quality, what's the cost of quality for this process, the real truth, and work our way out to the time, because time is money in most organizations, and really coming to grips with people, process, technology, and how these interact and what the actual real current state is, not what we've designed, but what's actually occurring. And that is the foundation that provides the basis to accomplish some of those things you really want to drive in when it comes to value engineering. We can aim our scarce resources, ours and our suppliers, at those 20% of the activities that consume 80% of our money, create 80% of our headaches and 80% of the delays in the process, and get the biggest bang for the buck. So you can read this chart on your own, but I just wanted to plant the seed. You're not going to always have the data to do this. You need to learn how to go get it. Back to you, David.
Very quickly, we have a question that
Sure.
just came in, and it's how do we identify and segregate internal and external requirements?
Great question. Segregating them is sometimes not straightforward, but it's taking a step back and let me think about that. David, do you have a quick answer to that while I think about that?
Well, I would think that you would, internally and externally, you would have a plethora of requirements, but the key is to focus on the critical few. So you would find in a typical product, a customer may have maybe up to 3 dozen requirements, but maybe 3 or 5 are critical, meaning that if there's non-conformance to those specifications, it's a dire form of customer dissatisfaction. So if we take, this is as far as the external customer is concerned, if we take the same mindset and apply it to our internal customers, right, and you ask them to really look at those things that, again, the 80-20 rule, right? Well, what are those 20% of the requirements that will drive 80% of the internal customer dissatisfaction? And you apply that same concept externally. Also, to laser focus limited resources, applying the 450 rule, which states that 4% of issues, of 4% of the requirements are the most critical. That if they're not delivered effectively, they would drive up to 50% of dissatisfaction, internally and externally. So that's a laser focus.
Yeah, another tool that comes into play that can be useful for categorizing or differentiating internal versus external requirements is the tool called quality function deployment. And that wraps around the notion of understanding what's really important to the customer, what's really important about our internal processes and how we're going to deliver the value to the customer, and creating correlations of criticality around those, and determining where we have competing priorities in those, determining where we have complementary priorities, and using that to organize both the internal and external requirements into a single view. So that could be part of the answer to that question as well.
Yes, and that's part of our leadership course, the quality function deployment, with the integration of the scoring and scorecarding and matrixing the internal and external customer requirements, and really understanding that and having that as an underpinning of all of the activities in a procurement function. And a supply chain must be subordinate to market requirements, customer requirements, and business requirements, essentially stakeholder requirements. Okay, so in this dimension, or this competency, we focus on leveraging the SCOR process. Again, on this, having a thorough understanding of the supply chain as far as the planning processes are concerned, the sourcing processes, the manufacturing, or what you call the make processes, and the delivery and reverse logistics processes, having a thorough understanding of how the procurement function impacts all of those supply chain processes is essential. In this dimension, we also focus on leveraging the supply chain prioritization matrix. Which one of those supply chain strategies should we really focus on? Because you have the different category types, the make to order, engineer to order, make the stock. So which one of those supply chain types would give the organization the best bang for their buck? And understanding the strategic SCOR framework and the level 1, level 2, and level 3 metrics. And here we have the looking at our organization and our supply chains from these critical areas here. We have the financial metrics, we have the operations metrics, and we added the environmental impact metrics. And these are the operational definitions, and these are the actual key metrics here, which are on the right side of the matrix. So it's very important that we understand that our procurement function, how effective is our processes and our people, our talent pool, in ensuring that our organizations are able to meet our order fulfillment cycle time. What impact does the procurement function have on this? And then perfect order fulfillment, and again, meeting customer satisfaction and the customer requirements, and how effective our suppliers are at in shipping the inbound materials in order to enable our procurement function to have that what you call perfect order fulfillment. How effective and how flexible our supply chains, and how Ron mentioned the total cost to serve, our cash to cash cycle time. So we have to understand how the activities in the procurement function and our processes, how we impact these critical areas. And in this competency, we see that one of the key areas that procurement leaders must be able to be effective in is to transform the procurement function. And NLPA, we designed what we call a strategic operations transformation model, which focuses on 9 dimensions, again, underpinned by customer, market, and business requirements. And we see that it's very important that as procurement leaders that we have we develop a vision for our procurement function, and that we effectively articulate that and share that with our key stakeholders, and that we continuously improve our processes and the technology in order to meet customer requirements. And we ensure that we have the right talent. We continuously monitoring and developing our talent pool in order to realize the organizational objectives. And we're going to touch on a little later on our PASS program that NLPA has in order for us to assess and to improve our talent pool. In this competency, we learn to effectively manage our metrics and to understand how each key performance indicator impacts the organization, and to look for what you call cause and effect relationships between those key performance indicators. And in this competency, we have what you call the master dashboard. We have the procurement function dashboard and the ability to effectively present. So the higher up we go in the organization, we have to be able to present concepts to the senior leadership and to be able to get our key points across effectively. Ron, would you like to elaborate on the master dashboard?
Yeah, there's not a lot to say here. I mean, we can read this and kind of dive into it and take a good hard look at it. You know, this is just some hypothetical examples, but when you think about dashboarding, the key advice I have for organizations is be careful what you measure, right? So it's the old saying is, be careful what you ask for because you might get it. So very wise to spend the time to understand what are the handful of balanced metrics that are very important from a sourcing perspective, that we manage those and understand them well. And then generally it's going to be something internally focusing around cost, something externally focusing around customer satisfaction, something internally focused around our people, developing our people. I mean, one of the big challenges for us as procurement professionals is maintaining a team, our own team, developed and nurtured and building the skills to manage the supply chain of the future. That's a pretty big deal. And then, so those things need to be balanced. But the other aspect that is a little tricky, but not hard if you think carefully about it, is what are the right trailing indicators, right? And a handful of things we would track, like total cost to serve. That would be definitely a trailing indicator because it's a lot of work to figure out what it is. And you have to use data from the past to get there. So it doesn't tell you a lot about what happened yesterday. Leading indicators would be things that are more dynamic. It's something you're capturing every hour or every day, and we can take a snapshot of how our process is performing. So if we take a look at the chart here, we've got what's called a run chart. You can see this line running across the chart from left to right. If upward is good, that's a good signal. We're going in the right direction. But if upward is bad, it signals something changes, and we have to take action to bring it back under control if we're working to a particular target value in terms of the performance of the process. So using run charts and statistics is not that difficult. The trick is picking the vital few that actually matter and then coming up with simple ways to capture that and then share it appropriately with those who need the data, and then support them with the tools, methods, training, whatever it is, to empower them to take action every day, right? To bring it under control, keep it under control, and move it in the right direction.
Okay, and I have a quick question here.
Sure.
Is there a reference point for supply chain goals by industry?
That's a really good question. Yes and no. If you get into a specific sector like distribution and third-party logistics and dive way down in there, you're going to find they have some pretty unique bits and pieces in there you wouldn't necessarily find in, say, the SCOR framework. The SCOR framework defined metrics are pretty useful because they look at types of supply chains: make to stock, make to order, engineer to order, and retail. So one of those supply chains is likely going to correlate to a particular industry you're in. So that leap to really come to grips with those isn't that hard. But the reality is, if you're in mining and digging stuff out of the ground and all that processing, that's going to have some unique aspects. So I would suggest it's probably a hybrid. In the automotive industry, we had some very specific things around supplier performance and the way we communicated requirements and the tracking of that, just-in-time inventory and some other things. It was very advanced. Probably not appropriate to try to adopt those in an industry with a different model. David, would you care to take a crack at that?
I agree with that, Ron. Really understanding the business landscape and understanding what are the current trends, and then understanding what are the meanings and the impacts of those trends, and how our organizations are positioned to address those trends. I think is very, very, very important.
One more question I have as well, gentlemen. Is SCOR publicly available?
The answer to that is yes and no. ASCM, which was formerly APEX, had merged with the Supply Chain Council, who were the original developers of the SCOR model. There's a lot out there in the public domain. They have a SCOR framework. You can actually go to the ASCM, Association for Supply Management, go right to their website. You can download quite a bit of information to help you understand attributes of performance, standard processes, high-level standard metrics, etc. But behind that, there's two really thick binders with hundreds of pages of detailed definitions of what all this stuff means, the best practices, the processes, etc. Those you have to pay for in the line of actually taking a SCOR certification training program. So yes, you can learn a great deal. It's out there on the internet available. You can get a lot of it free from ASCM. But if you want to master the details, that's another story.
Do we have this polling question up? It's the final polling question.
Okay, I'll get it up now. Everyone should be able to see the polling question.
Yes, so this is the focus of this is the 7 competency leadership areas for procurement leaders, and which ones that we think you like to learn more about. That's really of interest to you.
Yeah, Amber, was this a pick one only, or do they get to pick multiple choices?
No, it is multiple choice, and there are
Perfect.
people answering at the different ones now.
Perfect. So you can click on as many as you like. I'm interested in seeing the results of this.
Okay, we'll give it a few more seconds, 10 more seconds, and we'll go ahead and wrap this up. Okay, and here are the results.
Interesting.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so strong interest across the board. But look at that, David, around design strategy and function strategy to realize and support corporate strategy, really strong correlation. So
Interesting.
wow, that's wonderful feedback from the audience, and will help us aim a little bit in future development and continuing to improve the product over time.
Yes, interesting. Thank you very much for that feedback. And I'll pass this one on to you, Ron.
Okay, just learn to do it, is something that David's kind of invented, and it's pretty cool. And this is describing all new in 2020 through Next Level Purchasing Association, an alternative to just commercial off the shelf, e-learning, online learning, on-demand learning, and being able to package, I'll call it COTS, C-O-T-S for commercial off the shelf, training and stuff available to us, and combining that with how do we put it into practice. And there's a myriad of models of how that can happen, from, hey, my industry is kind of unique and I don't necessarily want all off the shelf cookie cutter, could we customize the content around the specific kinds of gaps we have in our organization? Or if there's particular enterprise objectives and priorities for us, we need to learn it all, but help us really master these 3 to 5 real core things and become really good at it. Drill deeper into that, maybe even do projects, practice projects, case studies, etc. And maybe in another scenario, you've been tasked with, I've got to go find, a 10% cost down. I don't mean price, I mean cost. I got to go find and execute on 10% cost down for total cost to serve across our supply chain. That means how we use it, how we consume it, how we dispose of it, etc. Maybe we need somebody who's been there and done that to come in and actually help you develop the strategy and help you program, manage your way through it in a learn it by doing it modality. Thus, learn it, do it. David, what would you add to that?
Yes, I think it's a very, very important way to, a method to get a strong ROI on the training dollars, right? So it's one thing to learn stuff, and there's another thing to put it into practice. So this is we would focus on the critical gaps in your organizations. You'd look at what are the top 3 problems that exist that impact the procurement function and organizational performance. And then we start with one problem at a time, and we would work at your pace and implement exactly what you learn. And then we have coaches who would ensure that happens. And so I think it's a very, very powerful way to effectively transfer that knowledge that you learn in the classroom to the workplace and have that guidance and to solve organizational problems.
Excellent. Thank you. Good job.
Thank you, sir. Do we have any more questions?
Let's see, there's one that just came in. What are some of the digital or IT tools or skill sets a procurement professional should do in view of Industry 4.0 or fast changing industry?
That is a very good question. And would you repeat the question or really wrap my head around it? One more
Yeah,
time.
it's kind of long. What are some of the digital or IT tools or skill sets a procurement professional should have in view of the industry changes?
Okay, well, it's going to depend on your industry and the basis of competition. That's going to be the first piece, because one of the things about Industry 4.0, and it's a moving target. It is not static. It's changing every day. And a couple of aspects to that I'd like to share is, one is the people part of it. So from a procurement perspective for our people, we have to educate our folks and help our folks be able to come along and be ready for the future times. One of the things that never ceases to surprise me is, we've done well doing it this way all the time. And now we come along with Industry 4.0 and we're like, oh, that's bad. It's different. We're scared of it. We've got to learn how to embrace and really have open minds to the art of the possible. Another important aspect about Industry 4.0 that anybody can do without a whole lot of technology is this notion of realizing it's not a big bang. It's not like buying an enterprise resource planning system and we stand everything up and boom, we're off running an ERP with everything under complete control. It's not like that at all. It's an incremental, bit by bit solution, right? I'm going to engage with, some Internet of Things technology to enable my suppliers to really know on a real-time basis what's going on with my equipment process so that they can do better predictive preventative maintenance, right? Reliability-centered maintenance is, a big thing that's getting more and more prominent of how do we know we're getting the maximum output of our equipment from a quality, throughput, and productivity perspective, but at the same time, how do we know we're spending just the right amount of money to maintain that level of perfect functionality? So, total productive maintenance is a strategy and you can overdo it. So technology is part of the answer to that question. And this is where our suppliers, because we'll often outsource a lot of our maintenance operations, we're definitely buying the equipment from suppliers. We should be very demanding of all of our suppliers going forward. That'll be important, is just learning how to ask the critical questions about, talk to me about your organization's understanding of, with the emerging body of knowledge, Industry 4.0, and how are you as my supplier ensuring that we're in front of it with your help, right? So we can have them educate you. I'll guess that 80% of what you need to know as a sourcing professional, you can learn from your suppliers, because they're actively doing it on the front line in many cases, and they can edify and educate you in a hurry. So I don't feel like as a sourcing professional, we need to learn a whole lot of technology personally. We just need to become really good consumers of it and learn how to assess and understand what technology offers as opportunities, and then selectively pick the things that you need to learn more about personally to be effective in assessing its value. David, would you add anything to that?
Yes, it's also very important to understand technology from the user standpoint, internally and externally. And, oftentimes organizations that they would purchase technology and the technology provider would give them a plethora of things that they don't need. And that's because an effective user case scenario was not done, where you would go to the stakeholders or the people who actually execute the work across the supply chain and ask them what do they need to execute their functions. And again, understanding the processes, having that understanding of what are the inputs that are needed to execute the process and what are the desired outcomes, again, the customer requirements. With that said, understanding user requirements and making sure that that's done could result in effective spend on technology and not spending on things that you don't need. And then the things that you actually need, because a user case scenario was not done, that assessment was not done effectively, then now you have to go back to the provider and say, oh, well, we also need this. And he sold you a lot of things that you didn't need. So really understanding technology from the user standpoint is very important, and involving people in that process. So again, we go back to understanding the procurement processes, understanding the supply chain processes, having that interpersonal skill set, developing that is very important. We're in an age of collaboration, intense collaboration, and again, the problem-solving skills. So this leadership program that we have, the Supply Chain Executive, it equips you with all of those tool sets.
If we have time for another question.
Sure.
There seems to be more Six Sigma quality, data science, and analytics training required to operate procurement improvement skills. Could you comment on that?
I'll take a crack at it, and then I'll let David add to it as well. It could certainly appear that way. I would assert, any professional that wants to advance in their career and really make a difference in their organizations, almost by default, needs to have a decent foundation of understanding best practices from a continuous improvement perspective. It doesn't mean you need to be a statistician or a Six Sigma black belt, and it doesn't mean you need to be a Lean Six Sigma sensei. But there are some basic fundamentals to good lean practices that's actually built into the standard courseware for NLPA. And I would assert that most organizations probably have some belts running around, right? Somebody in a continuous improvement area. I'll almost guarantee anybody that's come out of engineering school in the last 20 years has been taught, statistics, some total productive maintenance. They probably know a lot about time and motion studies, some of the classic lean tools. So I would assert that for most procurement and sourcing professionals, not maybe necessary to run out and get trained right away. It's just a question of reaching out. Okay, what are some of the tools I can get out of the standard body of knowledge provided by the NLPA? What are the resources in the organization we already have? And can I leverage those and just learn the aspects of that I need to know to be effective? I wouldn't argue that everybody needs to run out and become a yellow or a green belt. That'd be nice, but the reality is probably not feasible. So the trick is, what are the aspects about Lean Six Sigma best practices give us the most leverage in sourcing and procurement, and maybe dig a little deeper into those and just be aware of what else is available to you. The other thing I would assert is your suppliers, you're going to be hopefully pleasantly surprised if you challenge them with, talk to me about your adoption of Lean Six Sigma best practices, continuous improvement. Listen carefully to their answers. It'll tell you how progressive they are. And if they haven't offered to do it, maybe they should be sharing some of the wealth. What could we do to create some joint continuous improvement opportunities? And you can teach me, the sourcing professional, a little bit of what I need to know, because you already know it. I can take advantage of that. David?
Also, too, it's important to understand that approximately 25 to 40 cents on every dollar that is expended in an organization is spent on waste, activities that don't add value, and that's spend. So that the mere fact that we're talking about spend, that's part of the procurement function, right? To manage spend. So if we understand, and this is beyond the price. Again, a key underpinning of our platform is, yes, getting the best price points for our inputs is essential, but there are so many opportunities, as we saw in the total cost to serve matrix, for realizing cost reduction. And that 25 to 40 cents, it is something that procurement is forced to do. So if you have an understanding of how to unlock, and using the tools, the lean tools, right? How much in our supply chains, how much transportation exists, unnecessary transportation, unnecessary motion, unnecessary inventories, right? Inventories that are exposed to becoming obsolete or shrink, or the carrying cost. How much over processing that goes on in the procurement function itself, in our day-to-day activities, the day-to-day work. How time, how many times we touch something more than once unnecessarily. And how many times for example, we produce reports that no one reads or just don't add value. So if you look internally into the procurement function, we would see, we will realize, we will identify a plethora of opportunities for cost reduction. And then if we look outwards to the entire supply chain, including at the supplier's warehouse, right? So if you look at it, and if you go downstream to our customers, right? We look at the entire end-to-end process, we could see a huge amount of, identify a huge amount of opportunities to reduce costs. And then the lean tools really give, I would say that they consider lean, what they say, a inch deep and a mile broad, and Six Sigma is very narrow but very deep. And a lot of the lean tools are more intuitive to understand and to implement. So a lot could be done with leveraging lean tools as opposed to Six Sigma tools. What do you think about that concept, Ron?
No, I would agree with that. And it's back to this notion of you don't need to master all of it to make a big difference.
Exactly. Yes.
And it kind of gets back to this notion of Pareto's law, or 20% of the opportunities may yield 80% of the results. And it's very common to find that if you look at the 110 or 15 different defined tools in Lean Six Sigma, you know, if you're probably pretty good at 8 or 10 of those, you'd be darn dangerous, at least in the context of your organization and the lever you can pull to help total performance in the organization.
Yeah. So if you attack the waste, then you reduce spend.
Yep.
You reduce spend.
Everything affects everything else.
Exactly.
Back to you, Amber.
Okay. I don't think we have any more time for additional questions, but we appreciate everyone attending. Gentlemen, thank you so much. This was a very informational and informative. It was an informative webinar. We had a great time. For all attendees, if you are interested, you can find out more about our courses on nextlevelpurchasing.com, and we look forward to having you join us next month. Everyone have a great afternoon.
Thank you. Good job.